there it is. Good evening. I'd like to, with great respect and humility, acknowledge that we are and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ages, traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. And we are calling the meeting to order at 6:02. It is lovely to be here with everyone tonight on what is a beautiful night here in Snuneymuxw. As I'm looking out my window, I can see this bit of the sun still shining and some blue sky as the sun starts to set. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight with regard to tonight's agenda? If you just put it in the chat. Seeing none, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Trustee Keller. Need a seconder in the chat, please. Seconded by Trustee McKay. Thank you. Anyone opposed to approving the agenda as presented? Seeing none, I'd seek a motion that the minutes from the Education Committee meeting held September 8th, 2021 be approved, please. Trustee Wilkinson. Seconded by, just looking for a seconder, Trustee McKay. Any discussions, any discussion or corrections? Give another moment. All right, seeing none, is there anyone opposed to approving the minutes as presented? All right, seeing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. We have no presentations tonight. We have 2 reports from senior staff. The first one is 8.1 from the Department of Learning Services. Deputy Superintendent Tim Davey will be speaking to us tonight on an introduction to compassionate learning systems. If there are questions, please request to speak in the chat. And Tim, I think we'll let you do your presentation and we'll take questions after your presentation.
Very good. Madam Chair, thank you very much. And through you, I'm going to just turn your attention, please, to page 6 through 16 of the board package that you have in front of you. And what you have beginning with an information sheet and then some appendices attached to that. So you've had a chance to opportunity to look through the information that's being presented on the topic of compassionate learning systems. And what I'll be doing is I'll be introducing our presenters this evening, and as you've noted, we will save questions that the Education Committee might have until the end of the presentation, and that would also obviously apply to the information sheet. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just point out in terms of compassionate learning systems, just to tie back then to the Board of Education strategic plan, goals and strategies are the objectives. What we're looking at here is compassionate learning systems, in our opinion, then ties into continuous improvement of instruction and assessment, and also ties into the area of safe, caring, and healthy learning and working environments that is inclusive to the diversity of our entire learning community. And we're very excited about this project that we are undertaking as a department, and obviously helping to spread this throughout the district. Certainly what you'll note is a direct tie-in to work that's happening in the classrooms, and the expected impact then through our indicators of success as we're tying this back to directly how this is going to relate to students. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Programs, Laura Tate, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Programs, Don Balcom, Director of Instruction for Inclusive Education, Carrie Steele, and Director of Instruction for Learning and Innovation, Jackie Poulin, who will be leading us through our presentation this evening. So thank you to our team from the Department of Learning Services, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm wondering if my tech assistant could pop up the PowerPoint for us, if you will. That's great. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Compassionate Learning Systems is our title this evening. You have received some information on this topic of compassionate learning systems in an earlier package. So this evening, Learning Services will be providing a high-level summary of this information for you. So COVID has provided us many unexpected pathways over the last couple of school years. We are more than aware of COVID from a medical perspective. It's a virus and it can make us physically sick, to say it simply. Over time, however, what we are learning is that the impacts of COVID run quite a bit deeper. We're now seeing that this pandemic is affecting everyone, emotionally, socially, psychologically, and myriad other ways. It is these impacts that we are responding to from a systems perspective. We are responding by learning and becoming more compassionate, not only as individuals, but as a system. And compassion is mostly referenced as pertaining to people, so understanding how compassion pertains to a system is our goal. To that end, we are beginning our understanding in a leadership learning series district-wide, and we're attending to social-emotional learning and well-being at a school-based level as well. This work of compassion honors the heart, mind, body system, the learner, the social reality of relationships, family, and community, and responds to the need to engage learners of all ages in fostering systemic well-being at all levels, from the individual to the larger systems of institutions and society, economy, ecology. Viewing education through a compassionate lens also includes regarding data through the same lens. Like systems, this is a new and exciting way to view data, a way that we are only in the beginning stages of exploring. Having said this, however, I would state that many of the tenets of compassion, resonate deeply with educators, so this exploration with data seems the perfect fit. My colleagues and I have been inspired by the work of Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan and their work around street data. The premise of the book underlies the notion of that our Western colonized systems reinforce that everything can be measured and classified, rather than a paradigm that roots equity, pedagogy, and school transformation in what matters most, the human experience. They distinguish three main types of data. We've got those on the screen for you here. So way up at the top here, we have what they call satellite data. It's the easiest to gather usually and can lead to some good questions. It's often lagging and a bit more static. It's further from the classroom and may lead to single stories and possibly deficit thinking. Examples could be our FSA, completion rates, provincial assessments, course completions. A little further down, a little lower, a little deeper is map data. This could be student and family surveys, common assessments like our NLPS reading assessment or running records. And then deeper and lower still is the street data. This is more personal and dynamic. This is the data that's there daily and in the moment. Individual student surveys, student work samples, our formative assessment conferences with parents are all good examples of street data. And these aren't simply, data that's, feelings or stories or anecdotes. They are educated observations, artifacts, relationships, extremely valid forms of assessment. So those three levels of data, I'm going to ask my colleague to pop on and help define this for us a little bit more.
Awesome, thank you very much. So what I'd like to do next is just take trustees through a little analogy of satellite map and street data using a sport that most people are familiar with. So we're going to use basketball, and we're going to use some local players here for this analogy. So imagine that we have a team A and Team B, and Team A plays 10 games a year against Team B. And so we have 3 years of data. This will be satellite data. These are the results, their standings for the year. So the first year, Team A wins 4 games and loses 6 games. And then in year 2, they win 5 games and lose 5 games. And then in year 3, they win 6 games and lose 4 games. So at the satellite level, as Laura just mentioned, it leads to more questions. It doesn't necessarily provide meaning. We can't necessarily make a lot of meaning out of that data, but it does lead us to some questions. And the questions are, why did Team A have more success in years 2 and years 3 than they did in year 1? Are they a better team in year 3? And so those questions lead us down to the map data, which is inside the gym. So instead of looking at the box scores and saying, here's the results, we have to go to the gym and start asking some of those questions. So some of the questions involved on that the Team A is, first of all, like, who's on this team? And in this example, let's assume that we have 4 members of our Department of Learning Services on this team, and you can pick any 4 that you want to suit up on this team. And the 5th player on this team is LeBron James, who happens to be probably one of the best players who's ever played the game. So there's a little bit of information that we didn't know just by looking at the record of 4 and 6, 5 and 5, and 6 and 4. And the Team B that they're playing has 4 players that are not quite as good as NBA players, but they're really, really good basketball players. And their 5th player is a superintendent that sings well, who will remain unnamed, but you can probably think of one. So now we know a little bit more about what's happening inside the gym. At that map data level, we also want to know who's coaching, like what are the skills of the people that are guiding these teams? How often do they practice? Do they have other supports? Do they have a nutritionist? Do they have a strength and conditioning coach? What are, do they have a team psychologist? Like, what are the other pieces that go into putting this team together? That helps explain the record a little bit better. So if they have a top quality coach, sometimes you can explain the results and say, oh, well, Team A practices twice a day, 6 days a week, and Team B started off practicing that much, but in years 2 and 3 they practice less. So the map level data often helps us explain the satellite data. You can connect a pretty good dot there or line there and say, well, that makes sense. That helps explain why the results might be getting better. But to determine where they're going to go next in years 4, 5, and 6, we need to get down to the street level data. And those questions are very specific. What are the strategies in place on Team A to help those 4 members of the Learning Services team improve their skills year after year after year? We know LeBron James is not going to get a lot better, and without the 4 other members of our Learning Services team improving, the prognosis of the satellite data improving are not very good. On Team B, those 4 players are going to have to find some way to have the superintendent that sings well improve some skills. And so there'll be very specific strategies to include that person, to have their skills be able to be adaptive to play alongside people who are so fast and quick and can do all those things. So the street level data helps inform us to know, oh, if those strategies are in place, at the very, very gym level, where your shoe goes, where you turn, how you position your elbow on a free throw, all of those little details are the really important strategies that only happen at the street level, but they do help us inform the end result where we're going to pull back up to the satellite data. So if we want to predict how are these 2 teams going to fare in years 4 and 5 head to head, we've got to get down to the street level data, hear those stories, hear those strategies, figure out which strategies are personalized for one player, because that's an important piece as well, and then we can predict up. So satellite data gives us a great starting point to ask questions. Map data helps us make sense of what the satellite data is and helps kind of explain, I know enough to make meaning of why that data is there, but the predictive piece of where we go forward is really down in the street level data.
So Don, where my elbow is placed in my free throw shot is going to it's going to help to tell the story about our 5 and 5, right?
Yes.
Thank you for that. So 3 summary ideas for you. All 3 forms of data are important and interrelated. The importance or value we place on data is subjective, and gathering data should not be transactional but relational. Focusing on street data eventually informs the satellite data, but this takes time. Street data is ground floor and very responsive and incrementally small. Street data is now, and by now I mean now, October 2021. We don't have satellite data on this COVID existence, right? We don't have decades worth of data of what it's like to live and learn in a pandemic. So street data is more important than ever. We are in the moment and we are granular, and this is the best place for us to be just now.
Thank you. So I'm picking us up for the next piece. So I'd like to talk about how all of this information about data that we've just shared connects to this notion of becoming a compassionate learning system together. We know that this work around compassionate learning systems is supported provincially. I mean, the province put a great deal of time and effort and financial resources towards getting a whole bunch of us trained in the compassionate learning systems framework last year. And we know that there's lots of information that's been coming to us around mental wellness during COVID and supports and resources for children, family, community, school systems. You know, we're keenly aware of the importance of supporting the adults in the system so that they can take better care of the kids in the system. So we know that. We know that there's research supporting that. We know that we're getting direction from outside the system that that's an important initiative to be taking. But it is a really hard thing to measure, right? When you put an initiative together that looks like a whole bunch of people investing in an initial batch of Pro-D, which really is what it is. A bunch of us have taken the 4-day session already. There are more members of our team in the broader system who will be taking it at later points in the year. You know, we're doing that, and then we're planning a learning series together where we're going to bring some managers and leaders from across the system to learn some of those skills and strategies as well. And we're embarking on some work with our school teams across the system. So Director Poulin will be sharing a few more details about those in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to share about the learning system piece in our series together as adults a little bit this year. So we believe deeply this is really important, but measuring it's going to be tricky. So when we think about the levels of data we'd like to look at around that, at the satellite level, we do have some quantitative data. We can look at staff absentee rates. We can look at our rates of recruitment and retention of employees. We had a staff wellness survey that was done last year, which essentially examined whether or not we were a psychologically safe workplace. That was done through our health and safety department. You know, some of those things, our current state of those things can serve as a baseline for us, and certainly we can track those over time. But it's a little bit summative, right? When you're collecting that kind of information, you're looking at the end of a year or the end of a 5-year period. So we really, the satellite data gets us started and it gets us wondering about things, as was stated earlier, but we really need to move deeper into things a little bit to look at it some more. So at the map level, you know, we know that we're going to be working collaboratively to utilize the tools that we're being taught. You know, in addition to attending the session and practicing some tools with individual reflection, we're going to be challenging people to take those tools and models back to their respective departments and work environments and give them a try in other contexts. So if we're collecting some map data, some of that might look like collecting some samples. You know, as system leaders, as leaders, managers, directors of departments, have you used the models? How did they work? Do you see a difference in the way your teams are approaching things? Do you see a difference in the efficacy of some of the other initiatives that you're trying to implement across the system? We know that collaborative learning systems, or pardon me, compassionate learning systems are collaborative. So if we look at our present structures, and then a year from now we look to see have we grown in our collaborative structures and processes interdepartmentally? Are we working together and more cohesively than we were historically? We have some long-standing challenges. Any large organization will have things that they're trying to figure out and do better and more deeply and more efficiently. Have we solved some of those challenges in a really adaptive and supportive way? Are we getting at things that we were struggling to get at before because we know how to do the work deeply and differently together? So that'll capture a picture of what's going on, you know, coming from kind of system data to department or inter-school data a little bit. And again, we'll keep drilling down. And when we get to the street data, that really is about the notion of a common understanding and just, are we at our core, at our foundation, approaching things in a similar way? If we use the phrase compassionate learning system, can people department to department, meeting to meet, like, can we describe that in a similar way? Do we understand what that means when we say it? I can tell you without hesitation that that's not a definition you understand out the gate. We've had a number of Department of Learning Services meetings and collaborative meetings with folks working on this learning series with us, and it took us a while to know what we meant when we said that. It does take some time to figure all of that out. And again, you know, as we're having dialogue and shared experiences, do we really know whether or not our system is compassionate? Can we describe things we are doing together that are supportive of one another? Do we have open dialogue about how things are possible, you know, what improvements we can make, and are we doing that? Have we improved them? Are things getting better? So what patterns and themes are emerging as we're having these conversations and these experiences together, and what new questions are we left with? You know, that would be the formative piece in this, right? You take the things you know now and you ask some questions about them, and you go to the next place, and then you do that again and again. It's a recursive process where you keep reflecting and looking at it. I think Assistant Superintendent Tate referred to it in her introduction, in that these patterns and trends and themes that we're looking at, this street level data is a really different thing than just observations and artifacts. It's not about just looking and creating a snapshot. It's about creating a snapshot over time with some really intentional questions and pieces of reflection, so you can find those patterns and themes and really guide your next steps based on the place that you're at right now. So it's a very intentional bit of reflection, and the tools that we've been introduced to through this street data book, I'm super excited about, actually, because they are really intentional, and many of them are highly structured, which allow you to get at that information that sometimes we can see and feel, but we can't really articulate. It's going to give us a way to do that, and I think learning how to do that will help us become a much more compassionate system. So I'm actually really, really excited to see where the journey takes us this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Poulin, who has a bit of information about our two initiatives that we're starting with as well. Here we go.
Thank you very much, Director Steele. So as was commented on, we have done a fair bit of training and in-service and reflecting on a variety of things. Our Department of Learning Services has had lots of conversation around compassionate learning systems, trauma-sensitive practices, compassionate systems leadership, all the different terms that keep coming and kind of blending, and there's been a lot of conversation around it. And in the end, we determined that we actually needed to define and explain a parallel implementation process for compassionate schools. So I'm going to kind of just try to explain the two, and they've been both spoken to briefly, and I'll just go in a little bit more depth. So we're looking at our Managers Learning Series. Well, really, this is about building capacity for all of our system leaders across all departments. So it'll be facilities, HR, finance, principals and vice principals. I'm sure I'm leaving some out, but it's looking at all of the managers coming across and looking at introducing some really distinct tools that would help each individual reflect on how they show up for their staff, students, or their communities at large. So it's just taking some time to reflect back. These tools and strategies do come from the training that a number of us have done through the Compassionate Systems Leadership. Some did it last spring and some of us just last week, so it's pretty fresh in our minds in regards to the tools that were there. The reflections and understanding developed through this work, through the Compassionate Systems Leadership work, really should be overarching on every area that we approach in our workday and probably in our lives in general in regards to how we approach things. So it's around, again, how we're showing up, not just around social emotional learning, but around all learning, around all approaches and how we interact. So it's really meant to be a whole broad spectrum. Parallel to that, of course, we'll have things happening in our schools. So in our principal and vice principal meetings, that'll be strictly focusing with our education department, we'll be focusing on what are we doing in our schools around social, emotional, and academic learning. So we've decided to take the word compassionate out of that just to keep ourselves clearer on it. And we've renamed these to be SEAL teams, social, emotional, academic learning teams, to still give it an easy acronym. So we'll be looking at having our schools create their SEAL teams that would include teachers, admin, QP staff, students, possibly parents. They'll decide, and there'll be some structure around those teams, but they'll have a variety of voices on them. With their SEAL team, they'll collect both street data on what is currently being done in their school, as well as some map data through an approach that their team best meets the needs of their school. So, for example, on page 16 in your agenda, we gave you a copy of the NLPS CASTLE Foundation in regards to social emotional learning. And so one of the things around street data, we'll be having these SEAL teams take a look and do some reflection around what's already happening in their schools. What does it look like? What does it feel like in their schools around this? Having conversations with the various people on the teams. They'll also have some time as the year goes on to use some of the CASTLE tools to do some inventory on their resources, as well as looking at tools through CASTLE to do some surveys out to their community and using the various different pieces of information to determine their next steps that will best support some of the social emotional learning needs in their school for their students, staff, and their larger community. So again, it's taking that parallel approach and the tools that we're learning and reflecting on in the Manager's Learning Series will overarch all of that.
Thank you. So to wrap up tonight, I just we wanted to leave you with an image that I'm realizing it's a little bit blurry. I hope everybody can see it okay here. We blew it up quite a bit. It's an image that is in the street data text that we've been referencing. It's the Chinese character for listening, and it really encapsulates what we're trying to do this year, I think, in terms of really learning to listen with intent and purpose and collect really thoughtful pieces of information as we go on this journey to become a more compassionate learning system. So I'll just read you a little paragraph from the book that kind of captures what it's all about. So when we listen at the margins, we open our hearts to what is said, what is not said, what is seen and expressed non-verbally, what is perceived at the level of neuroception, and what is felt by the listener and the speaker alike. Far from a passive act, listening is a dynamic exchange that brings humanity to the process of school transformation. We listen with the ear, the eyes, one divided attention, the heart, and king. We listen to ensure that the solutions we devise are shaped by voices at the margins, rather than our projection of what people might need. This type of listening requires great skill and emotional intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davey, did you have anything? Were you wrapping up or got lost there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies again, just trying to get the mute button unmuted.
I know the feeling.
Yes, yeah. I just want to express my thanks to our presenters this evening and to the Department of Learning Services for bringing this forward through our system. And at this point, to turn it back over to you, just if there are any questions that might arise, either again from the information sheet or the presentation information that was shared this evening. So, thank you.
Do we have any questions from anyone? Okay, I'm going to watch the chat, but while they do that, one thing that I'm still trying to grapple with is when you're going through your data, when you're looking at all of this information, we're looking more for correlations as opposed to causal relationships. Am I correct in thinking that? Can we tease out any causalities, or is that too? We can't dig that deep, can we? Yeah, I don't know. I'm just if Trustee Stanley were here, she could word the question better. So somebody jump in.
I don't mind jumping in with that. Yeah, there's I think one of the things that we all know in education is that the data it's difficult to draw those direct, causation versus correlation ones. And, that's one of the things that we're quite excited about this book, which clearly delineates that satellite map and street data level, is we know that the strategies and the structures happen at the classroom level in interactions between teachers and other support staff with individual learners. And that's so that we know that that's where, this behavior, this strategy, this structure causes better learning. We know that that's where it happens. The place where it gets a bit muddy is when we look at how do we take that street data, pull it up to the school level, kind of map level, and then pull it up to the district satellite level, and still have that data share what we know in the classroom level. And often we get it wrong with data in big systems, right? We look and we say, we know that this is happening at the classroom level, and we make some assumptions that the results happening way up here at the satellite level are related, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes you have to kind of go back down and say, are we sure that what was happening, that strategy that was happening in the classroom that was working for that group of 5 students is really reflected in our results when we say a whole cohort of students are having success? And sometimes it's not. We need to back down and say, okay, we know that it's working for this group of students, and we need to build some learning profiles. We've talked about that, I think, before around what are some of the indicators of student success, and what are some of the indicators of barriers that we have in place that we need to identify and align the right strategies for the right learning profile. And so we know data is messy, but we also know that the stronger the correlation that we have with certainty, the more we can spread that from classroom to classroom to classroom to school to system wide. And yeah, it's a good question. It's a messy one.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson has a question.
Good evening. Thank you for this. And most importantly, I want to thank you for being responsive to the current times that we're in. I appreciate Assistant Superintendent Tate, your comment about being granular and recognizing where we are right now. I think that's really critical. So I'm so tired I might cry. That's how tired I am, literally. So my question is actually, it's more of a statement, and it's kind of like, let's like talk about this street data stuff, right? I think that's what we do here. And so I look at this so I appreciate the talk about like almost the street data up, changing the system. And I was looking at it actually from a different perspective when I read the book as well. And I think one of the things that I find really interesting about the notion of satellite map and street data is what it allows us to do is take trends. So you take the satellite data, you find some trends, and then you see something that's like, what's causing that? And rather than just focusing on that trend, you need to sort of dig down a bit, because you need to understand what's causing that trend. And you do that by digging down into the map data, and then most importantly, the street data, because the street data is what sort of identifies and uncovers the uncomfortable truths that then allow us to move that data back up to create the system-wide change that then alters the satellite data, or the results of the satellite data that at first were making us uncomfortable, whatever that was. Maybe it's a graduation rate or something like that. We're like, oh, ding, ding, ding. But if we just focus on the rate, then and don't dig down and hear the stories from the people, then we don't get to uncover the uncomfortable truths that then will allow us to make changes at the street level that would then affect the satellite data. Is that a fair interpretation?
Through the chair. I love that interpretation. And there's a couple things that you said that I sort of really resonate actually with this, and we're all passionate about it, I know, is you talked about, like, you're using words like uncover and going deeper. What we want to sort of avoid, I think, as I'm learning, is, using satellite data at the street level or using street level data at the satellite level. I think, we're looking at this, and as Assistant Superintendent Balcom has mentioned, is that satellite data causes us to ask questions and to get curious. And then what does that cause us to do? We're going to go deeper to the map level. We're going to ask more questions. We're going to uncover. We're not using that satellite data down here. It's just causing us to then dig a little deeper. Then we're going to go deeper to the street level, right? And then we're going to go through the process and we're going to roll that back up again. We're not going to take the street level data and put it up there where the satellite data belongs. We're going to start to climb up and go higher again in that sort of iterative process, yeah? I think we're saying the same thing.
Thank you. I see a question from our DPAC rep. Would you like me to read that for you, or would you like to state it yourself there, Jessica? Where's Jessica? Oh, please read it. Okay. Question: in level 2, there's mention of this being collaborative work. So will street data be a topic covered in PLC time this year?
Well, if we had PLC time, yes, I probably think it would probably cover this. I think I think what you're saying though is, and Assistant Superintendent Balcom, I welcome you to respond as well. I think theoretically, absolutely. And I think what you're asking is, are we going to get these notions, this philosophy, this approach, are we going to get that out to the field? Are we going to get that sort of practicing and practicalities out there? Absolutely. What we're also saying with loads and loads of humility is we are all learning this. I think, like Trustee Hagan said, we've read the book, we've watched some videos, and then we're now coming together to talk about this and risk even by sharing it publicly today, because we're still very much in the beginning stages and we're learning about that. So we're learning about this and we're getting the learnings out there as we speak, as we're planning sessions with principals and vice principals to then, of course, take it back to the school level. So I think the answer overall to that is yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Jessica? I think you're frozen. No, she's gone. She's frozen. And Trustee Higginson, I apologize. I didn't ask you if you had a follow-up.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I'm going to give it 12 more seconds. Okay, I'll ask a quick question. Are there any copies of the book available? I would like to read the book.
We can get more books for sure.
Thank you. Okay. All right, well, I really want to thank you for this really in-depth and interesting, exciting presentation. I'm really looking forward to learn more about this. I think it's really great work we're doing. I think it will make a very profound difference for our children and for our schools. And Heichka, I raise my hands to you for all of your efforts, and I appreciate your time. All right. And so now we will move to item 8.2, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh, regarding Administrative Procedure 325, formal complaints and appeals.
Good evening, Madam Chair and staff, trustees, guests. Thank you very much for being able to speak this evening. Before the board this evening is just an AP for information on the appeals administrative procedure. And so we brought this to the board with a few minor updates last year as a result of reviewing the general ombudsman or ombudsperson's office guide to ensure that the process met the kind of modern standards of procedural fairness. And so we made a few changes last year. And since we brought that to the board, we've actually had the opportunity to consult with the ombudsperson's office a little bit more, and a couple of issues that they suggested to be addressed in this process are being brought and updated. And so again, the board will, in the memo, will be able to see what they are, but I'll just go over them quickly for folks that may not have reviewed that. And so the first item is the concept that often in the appeals process, so thank you, Ms. Matthews, for bringing that up. Often in the appeals process, what we have is individuals that are appealing items that really shouldn't be subject to the appeal process. And on occasion, we're in a dispute about whether something is appealable or not. And frankly, it doesn't happen very often that appeals occur at all. But what leads to confusion a little bit is if a staff member says, well, that's not appealable, individuals just assume that's the end of the line for their ability to challenge a decision. And of course, really in reality, the board under its bylaw is the only one that can actually determine that something's not appealable and won't hear it. And so what this essentially says is that if staff can still say, well, we don't think it's appealable, the issue you've brought forward. So let's say I am challenging the fact that Bobby was put in Mr. Smith's classroom rather than Mrs. Smith's classroom in September. Well, the board's own policy or the board's bylaw wouldn't really allow for that to be appealable. However, it doesn't, the School Act and the bylaw don't actually allow staff just to make that determination. We can say no, but then what we'd say is, okay, we've denied you on the fact that we say it's not appealable, but here's the next stage you can go to if you think that we are incorrect. And then ultimately the board can make that determination. So that's the first change. The second one is just a little bit clearer that where an error or omission happens. So I've moved my appeal straight to the superintendent, which often happens. And what the superintendent invariably does is he puts it back to the correct step or puts them to the right person. And so that happens, but it's just now kind of ensconced in the AP, so individuals will be aware that that is something that we will help them with. And then the final one is just throughout the process, just putting in the AP clearly that staff will tell individuals what the next steps are in the event that their appeal is denied. So just minor updates, and obviously these appeals are always associated with our educational services, and so we thought the Education Committee would be the best place to bring this because those are the issues that are being appealed when they do. And so happy to answer any questions, but really there's no change in our practice. It's just making it very clear to our community what we will tell them and what we as staff can and can't do with respect to moving or stopping an appeal.
All right, do we have any questions from trustees or partners? Trustee Keller.
Thank you, and through the chair to staff, I just wanted to say thank you for your work on this. I think it's important for transparency in our process for parents and caregivers and community to know what the process of an appeal looks like and what the options are. So I think this work helps with the understanding of that, and I thank you for that work.
And I see Trustee Higginson has also given her thanks in the chat. Just waiting to see if there's any other comments or questions. I would also echo my thanks. I am someone in my former life who has done advocacy work and had to do appeals, and this document is quite easy to follow. I think that it's really important that we have language and procedures that people can understand so that the steps are clear, and I think that you've done that with this document. Okay, another thank you from Trustee O'Neill. Just going to give it another moment. All right, I'm seeing no questions, so thank you for this report, Mr. Walsh. I shall now move on. I see no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting, and I see no unfinished business and no new business. Do we have any questions, Miss Matthews? No questions. All right. Given that we have no questions, we're at the end of our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by Trustee Higginson, seconded by Trustee McKay. Is anyone opposed to adjourning the meeting? I did not think so. All right. Thank you all for a great evening. Learned a lot tonight, although it was a little short by our standards. It was still very, very productive and very meaningful. And we look forward to seeing you next week at our business committee meeting. And happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrate it.